In a world where democracy is under attack and resistance has become a way of life, one orange president, two broads talking politics.
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. I'm here with my co-host, Sophy. Hey, Sophy.
Hey, Kelly.
And joining us today is my state senator and Democratic nominee for Attorney General in Illinois, Kwame Raoul. Hi, Kwame.
How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So I have a pretty good understanding of your background, but maybe for listeners who aren't familiar, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're running for Attorney General?
Sure. I'm a lifelong resident of Illinois. I'm the son of Haitian immigrants who settled in the state in about 1960. I'm a lawyer of 25 years. I'm a father of two college-age kids, and I've been a legislator for the last 14 years. I replaced Barack Obama in the state Senate 14 years ago on November 6th. I worked in the legislature on a wide variety of issues, including working with the current Attorney General, Lisa Madigan, on consumer protection issues, on making sure there are resources for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. I've worked on voting rights protection. I've worked on issues to try to deal with the epidemic of gun violence that we've dealt with, not only in the city of Chicago, but throughout the state. And, a wide variety of issues, trying to make sure we keep our water and air safe. And I'm running for Attorney General because I think there's never been a time where the position has been as essential as it is today. We see attorneys general throughout the country acting both collectively and individually as a last line of defense against sort of unconscionable acts coming from the Trump administration, and also advocating for people within their individual states on a broad number of issues, including, as I mentioned before, consumer protection, victims' resources, making sure there's advocacy for individuals and with regards to their utility rates and violence prevention, and a wide range of issues. Protection of health care, which is one that's particularly important to me.
You have run a state Senate campaign in Illinois before, which is, a campaign that I imagine would be in a smaller area, more legislatively focused, and now you're running a statewide campaign for Attorney General. Can you talk a little bit about how the experience has been different?
Well, yeah. Well, in part, I have to admit I've had it a little bit easy, I suppose, and I like to believe it's because I've done my job as a state legislator, but I haven't really been contested much in my local legislative district. And I truly want to believe it's because I've done my job, and that I've run towards difficult issues, not away from them, and I've taken leadership on a broad range of issues that matter not only to the people within my district, but throughout the state. Running statewide, even if I had more competitive races at the district level, is dramatically different. First off, I came out of a very competitive Democratic primary. I like to say we had an embarrassment of riches. There were 8 of us altogether vying to replace Lisa Madigan as the state's Attorney General, and I think I'm better for having had the intense competition that we had in the primary. I think it's prepared me well for the battle in the general election, and it helped me really focus on how important it is to illustrate for people what is at stake here. Unlike the primary, where our views were similar, if not exactly the same, on a vast array of issues, you probably couldn't find 2 candidates as different as Erica Harrell and myself are. And so, trying to illustrate that for the citizens throughout the state is an important challenge. there are a lot of people who can approach the elections not knowing who either Erica Harold or Kwame Raoul are, and presume that you've got a man running against a woman, and the woman candidate would be for the Equal Rights Amendment, would protect a woman's right to choose, would be for common sense gun laws, would oppose the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, but that's not the case with my opponent.
So you mentioned that healthcare is important to you. You are a cancer survivor yourself. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of the Attorney General role in protecting things like healthcare and pre-existing conditions?
Yeah, it's very personal to me for two reasons. One, you mentioned I am a cancer survivor. Two, I'm the son of a man who served as a community physician and who never turned back a patient because of their inability to pay. He believed in healthcare as a human right. I'm here today because I took advantage of healthcare coverage and the opportunity to embrace preventative healthcare and be the beneficiary of early detection with regards to my prostate cancer, and having that healthcare coverage so I can have a surgery that removed the cancer from my body. If one similar to me, where I had prior indications that I might have challenges with my prostate, would fall out of having healthcare coverage, and then would subsequently gain healthcare coverage, but not with coverage for pre-existing conditions. There could be a situation where I wouldn't have the benefit of coverage to cover my surgery, which is an expensive surgery, and their families all across our state and all across our nation who have been burdened with healthcare costs that render them in a debt that just can change the dynamics for a family. And right now in the Texas District Court, there are Republican attorneys general who are suing to remove protections for pre-existing conditions, and the natural defendant would be the federal government, represented by the Department of Justice. But Jeff Sessions has backed away from defending this lawsuit, and it is the Democrat attorneys general collectively who have stepped forth to defend it, including Lisa Madigan. It is, I was reading a newspaper article that tried to suggest that I was fear-mongering by talking about access to health care being under siege, and that the Attorney General's office has nothing to do with it. And that can be further from the truth. It's right now they're engaged in a litigation to try to preserve the protection for pre-existing conditions.
You had mentioned gun violence being an issue that's important to voters, not just in Chicago, but in Illinois in general. Could you talk a little bit about what you'd like to do if elected on gun violence?
Sure. First off, when I talk about it, I don't talk about it from just having seen stories in the paper or on the news. I've had to come home to my kids on several occasions after there's been gun violence directly outside of my home. Not in the neighborhood, not around the block, but directly in front of my home, and those are difficult conversations to have. I've worked in the legislature to try to advance policy to deal with the gun violence in our communities. I've focused on the repeat gun offender and trying to make sure that we hold individuals who have either committed violent acts or have illegally possessed guns on our streets, and who, after being convicted, go out and get another illegal gun and hit the streets with them, trying to hold those people accountable. I've worked on legislation to try to make sure that we can prevent the trafficking of guns into the hands of people who should not have them. I've worked on legislation to ban bump stocks and trigger cranks. So that's very important. Now, the Attorney General's office can be involved in several ways. They can advocate for passing common sense reforms to our laws dealing with guns, including gun dealer certification. The Attorney General can also engage, as the New York Attorney General does, in trying to help with tracing guns that have been utilized in crimes, and that's something that I would like to explore. That's not currently being done on a statewide basis in the state of Illinois. But the Attorney General's office is also engaged in making sure resources are directed to communities and to individuals who have been victimized. And I think it's important for us to examine our definition and expand our definition of who is a victim. Just a few days ago, I was riding in a car with a campaign volunteer who's a retired police officer who works with kids in neighborhoods of high violence. And we were on the south side of Chicago, and we drove up on a corner, and we saw two boys on the corner, and they were about 11 or 12 years old. And as we rode up to the stop on the corner, the instinct of the boys was to duck and put their hands up as if we were going to shoot from the truck we were riding in. And that was an illustration of the trauma that some of these young people go through who live in neighborhoods where violence is normalized, where gun violence is normalized. We have to do something to get resources to deal with the trauma caused by this normalized violence, because individuals like the two boys that we encountered just a few days ago, if we don't deal with the trauma that they've endured that leads them to believe that any car that pulls up to the corner is going to roll down the window and shoot in their direction, they can evolve to thinking that it's a normal thing to have gun violence in their neighborhoods, and it makes them more susceptible to becoming a perpetrator of the same type of violence. I was a juvenile prosecutor, and I served on both sides of the juvenile court. Child protection side, where kids were brought in after having been abused or neglected by their family members or others. And I served on the delinquency side as well, after having brought in kids for committing crimes. And when kids were brought in on the delinquency side, we would do background checks. And oftentimes the kids had been in the building earlier, not from having committed a crime, but having been a victim of abuse and neglect. It's a representation of the cycles of violence that exist in certain neighborhoods that could lead to a higher propensity towards certain individuals engaging in violence, and we need to break those cycles.
And I'm sure our listeners will also appreciate knowing how closely you've worked with Moms Demand Action. Been a great partner. I'm in Moms Demand in Chicago, and so I know I've seen you at many events, and that's been really a really great relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me say this. I think it's so powerful, having watched the evolution of Moms Demand Action and seeing moms from throughout the country and certainly throughout the state, having their voices heard, coming down to Springfield, making sure they talk to all legislators, because everybody, no matter whether they're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, can appreciate the voice of a mom. And it's a powerful group that's come together to advocate for common sense gun laws. And then it's been bolstered by a powerful group of young people who've come to the table, high school students who said enough is enough. You know, from the Parkland kids to kids on the south side of Chicago who have come together to say enough is enough. These voices collectively, I believe, are going to lead to change. And I have enjoyed collaborating and look forward to collaborating with Moms Demand Action and the voices of the young activists as well to say enough is enough and work to make sure that we stop some of this violence.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure that we talk about today?
Well, yeah, most certainly. I think each election presents the voters with a choice. And there's some elections where candidates are similar on a lot of issues, but in this election, as I mentioned before, there are so many differences between my opponent and I, and usually strategically, as a candidate, you don't want to mention the name of your opponent. But in my case, I've taken a different approach because I think it's important that people know who Erica Harold is. And one of the issues that she's been clear about is a woman's access to reproductive health care, that she would deny women access to reproductive health care even in the case of rape and incest. She's got very extreme views, and unless people hear about them, they will assume that she doesn't have these views. She indicated she could not weigh in one way or the other on the Equal Rights Amendment. One would assume that she would not only weigh in, but she would weigh in favor. She has not given any such indication. So, I think it's important to to know the differences between the candidates. And finally, I think there's a difference in terms of experience. I've practiced law for 25 years. I've worked as a prosecutor. I've worked in-house in a community college district encompassing 7 different community colleges, working both on traditional labor matters as well as employment discrimination matters and tort matters. I've litigated cases in federal court and in trial court before administrative tribunals. I've argued cases on appeal, and I've worked 14 years as a policymaker. My opponent simply does not have the experiences either as a lawyer or as a policymaker to hold a candle to that I have experienced over the course of the last 25 years. And experience matters. This is an important office. As I've said over and over again, I don't think there's been a time in American history where who we elect as Attorney General matters as much as it does today. And it's not time to experiment with one who has limited experience.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign in these final 13 days, how can they do that?
They can reach out to us. Contact information can be found at www.kwameraoul.com. That's KWAMERAOUL.com.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you so much for speaking with us. And thank you as a constituent for having been such a great state senator for the past 14 years as well.
Thank you so much.
I'm here in this segment with January Contreras, who is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in Arizona. Hi, January.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you start with just a little bit of an intro about who you are and why you're running for Attorney General this year?
Yeah, so I'm January Contreras. I'm running for Attorney General in Arizona, my home state. I'm a fourth-generation Arizona. I'm a working mom, a former county prosecutor, and assistant attorney general. I had the privilege of working for Janet Napolitano as an advisor to her when she was the governor and the secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And when I came home from the Obama administration, I started writing grants, and I started a nonprofit law firm. And we're free lawyers to kids and young adults dealing with homelessness, abuse, trafficking, and the foster care system. And about 80% of who we serve in any given year are women or girls. You know, that's my history. As you can tell from that, my entire career has been about public service. Besides my 2 sons, it's really why I felt I was put here on earth. And, you know, running for Attorney General is a part of that. We're in this very unique moment in time, probably part of the same reason that called you to start this podcast, to start educating Americans all over the country about being involved with their government, which means, unfortunately, being involved in politics. And for me, right now the courts and the lawyers really matter. There's a lot of big donors out there who want to hide their identity, who are calling the shots increasingly. And that's happening at a really high level here in Arizona and in the Attorney General's office now, and we need to stop it.
So Arizona has seemed like it's kind of ground zero for a lot of the things that are going on around the country, things with immigration, things like that. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what your priorities would be if you're elected Attorney General?
Yeah. As Attorney General, for me, part of it is we need to stop the politicization of the office. The Attorney General's office in Arizona has traditionally been the least partisan of any elected office in Arizona. And that's not true anymore, and we need to make that true again. Right now, I'm running against an Attorney General incumbent who is suing to take away health care from Arizonans and, quite frankly, people across the country. That would be unthinkable a few years ago, that you would have an Attorney General, the person who is the lawyer for the people, actually suing to take away their health care. That's how partisan this office has gotten. And so, for me, the priorities are we need to stop that. We need to put people above politics. We need to go after corruption because the long arm of this money that's gotten into elections, that's gotten into calling the shots in government is corruption. And we need to stop it because people will never come first as long as, these donors and the secret donors are controlling who's getting into office. So those are big priorities. And of course, we need to be protecting everyone's constitutional rights, not picking and choosing whose rights get to be protected.
As you're going around the state and talking to people, what are the kinds of things you're hearing from them?
People are talking about healthcare here because, well, number one, I mean, they're nervous about what's around the corner. And there's something to people just want some stability. And healthcare is a big part of that, with medical bills being the number one reason for bankruptcy. So people are talking about healthcare. Here in Arizona, people are asking about corruption and, are you really going to be different? Because they're so used to now the people in office sort of turning a blind eye to each other. Education is a big issue in Arizona. Our public schools have really been starved, and our teachers' salaries are not competitive. We have teachers working 2-3 jobs. And so I'd say those are three of the issues that the people talk the most about. And then you got some of the bread and butter issues that are unique to the Attorney General's office. They want to know how I'm going to stop robocalls, right?
So you mentioned that you're a working mom, as am I. Can you talk a little bit about how being a mom sort of informs your view about, the importance of being in political service?
There's no question. My two sons are the biggest reasons they've never chosen to be a candidate despite being in public service my whole career. But my two sons are also the biggest driving forces in why I said yes to running in this election. It's hard watching what's happening in our country and in our state through their eyes. When I had to explain in Arizona our SB 1070, which was really targeting immigrants in Arizona, when I had to explain 1072, which was an anti-equality, anti-LGBTQ bill, when I have to explain some of these issues to them, and they're just, wide-eyed, like, well, why would anyone want to do that? And they're, I love seeing how they're being critical thinkers, that they're really asking tough questions. But being a mom really, for me at least, keeps me grounded, because I can have a day where, I have my big debate, and it should be the most important thing of the day, but my son is rehearsing for his Model UN competition, and that's what's more on my mind. I think as moms, we want our all to be right in our kids' world, and that doesn't change when you're a candidate. And quite frankly, part of that is too seeing, young people for the Attorney General's office has a huge role with kids in the foster care system, and not every kid has the same support system in their family. Not every family has the same opportunity to succeed, whether mental health issues or addiction issues enter. The cases that involve abuse, those are the ones we know what to do with. We know to prosecute abusers and to protect these kids and get them out of their homes. And the other ones are things that we still need to work on and have a big picture. As a mom, I always keep those kids in my mind. That's what keeps me up at night. How do we do our best to protect kids?
One of the big issues around the country right now, and I know it's the case in Arizona as well, is the opioid epidemic. Can you talk a little bit about what the Attorney General's office could do to help with this?
Yeah, when it comes to the opioid epidemic, in many states, the Attorney General is a real leader in the efforts of the state. We haven't seen that in Arizona, but we will when I have the opportunity to serve as Attorney General. We, number one, should be collaborating with local law enforcement and communities, faith-based communities, nonprofits, the behavioral health professionals, to really come together and figure out how do we build the best system that can support families, that can support individuals, and provide treatment. When I sat down with a rural county sheriff here in Arizona who has supported me and talked about opioid, he said the one issue no one talks about is that you have to drive 2 hours from their major towns in order to get treatment. We need to fix that. But we also have the responsibility to go after the drug manufacturers, the drug distributors, and make sure that we're holding them accountable. If they're making millions of dollars while doing the wrong thing, then we need to make sure that we're holding them accountable.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you'd like to make sure we talk about?
I just mentioned the reason I became a lawyer in the first place is because I never wanted to be powerless for myself or for others. And every day of my career has been spent in that service. And it's really important for us to have attorney generals who are honest, who will put people first. And, you know, it's an exciting race. I'm only 1 point down, and I think people are looking for someone who's genuinely there to serve them. And so it's going to be an exciting time for Arizona.
If our listeners would like to help out your campaign in these final couple of weeks, how can they do that?
Anyone who's out there who wants to support a strong, people-focused Attorney General in Arizona can learn more about me or donate. www.january4FORAZ.com. Thank you so much for the chance to be here with you. And thanks for what you're doing, your own leadership.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for running this year. And we'll put a link to your website up on our website as well.
Thank you.
In this segment, I am here with Josh Kaul, who is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in Wisconsin. Hi, Josh.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. Could we start with just a little bit of background? Tell me a little bit about kind of your background coming into this and why you're running for Attorney General this year.
So I grew up in Oshkosh and Fond du Lac, and I grew up in a family that was deeply involved in public service. My mom was a prosecutor and elected official. My stepdad, Bill, was a police officer in Neenah. My mom's parents were both public school teachers in Fond du Lac. And I had the opportunity to spend part of my career as a federal prosecutor in Baltimore. I prosecuted drug traffickers, gang members, and murderers. And I've also gone to court to challenge laws that restrict access to voting. I'm a dad, I'm a husband, and I'm running for Attorney General because I want my family and families across Wisconsin to live in a state that's safer and stronger than we're on track for right now. And there's a lot that an effective Attorney General can do to help us move in the right direction on a number of issues, but I don't think we've had effective leadership under our current AG.
So what are some of those issues that you think are coming up right now and that you'd like to make your priority?
One area where I think we need more effective leadership is when it comes to fighting crime and getting justice for Wisconsinites. So we have an opioid epidemic that has been devastating for families across the state. We had nearly 900 opioid-related overdose deaths in Wisconsin last year. That's more than a 40% increase just as compared to 2015. And I think we need to do more to fight that epidemic. I think we need to ensure that our enforcement efforts are targeting large-scale traffickers who are sending drugs like heroin and fentanyl and meth across county lines and state lines. But I also think we need to significantly expand access to treatment. And I think we need an AG who's going to finally be serious about holding the pharmaceutical companies accountable for their role in the epidemic. Our AG also mishandled Wisconsin's backlog of untested rape kits. In his first year in office, we received millions of dollars to address that backlog. There were over 4,000 kits that needed to be tested. But after our current AG had been in office for 2 years, only 9 of those kits had been tested. And while progress has finally been made, what that mishandling of this backlog has meant is that there's been a delay in getting justice for survivors and that dangerous criminals have remained on the streets longer than they should have. So I think we need an AG who understands that eliminating that backlog should have been a priority from day one and that getting justice for survivors of sexual assault needs to be a priority going forward. And then on school safety, I think we need to do more as well. My opponent has suggested that we consider arming teachers. He's criticized gun-free school zones. And I think what we need are some common sense gun safety measures like universal background checks and a ban on bump stocks. And I'd also like to see long-term funding for mental health programs in our schools. So those are some of the criminal justice issues that are important ones in this race.
So Wisconsin has a lot of races that have been getting a lot of attention. Obviously, the governor's race, the Wisconsin 1st District congressionally. But I think that people often kind of overlook attorney general races, don't think about them as much. So as you're going around talking to people, knocking on doors, working with your team to do events, are people aware of this position? Are they aware of this race? What's kind of the reception that you're getting?
I think there's no question that, Senate races and governor's races tend to get more attention than AG's races. But I also think that, this is a race in which people are tuned in because there are some critical issues at stake. And so one of them is that my opponent is a leader right now, along with Texas's AG, of a lawsuit that's seeking to invalidate the Affordable Care Act. If that suit is successful, protections will be eliminated for people with pre-existing conditions. Young adults would lose the guarantee that they can remain on their parents' coverage until they turn 26. And the Congressional Budget Office estimates that if the major components of the Affordable Care Act are invalidated, more than 30 million Americans would become uninsured. So that's one example of some of the stakes. As AG, I think we should be, I would seek to withdraw from this lawsuit because I think we should be working to expand access to affordable health insurance coverage in Wisconsin. And I would be an advocate for expanding Medicaid, which is something we ought to do anyway, but particularly in the midst of an opioid epidemic. We'd be able to cover about 80,000 additional Wisconsinites under Badger Care, which means that more people would have the coverage they need to pay for treatment. And we'd actually save Wisconsin about $190 million a year that could be put towards other uses like expanding access to treatment or reducing premiums. So that's a policy that I'm an advocate for.
Can you explain a little bit about the relationship between the different parts of a state's government? So let's say Scott Walker was reelected, and so there was a Republican governor. What's sort of the relationship between the governor's office and the attorney general's office? How does that work in states with elected AGs?
It varies state to state, but in Wisconsin, it sort of depends on the context. So when you're talking about bringing enforcement actions, enforcement of environmental laws or enforcement of consumer protection laws or overseeing an investigation that's conducted by the Division of Criminal Investigation, there the AG is pretty autonomous. The AG is independent and acts as is appropriate. The only influence there that the governor has is that the governor is involved in setting the budget. But then there are other areas where there's more interaction. So if a state law or a state policy is challenged in the courts, typically the AG defends the state agency or the state statute. The AG does that as long as there's a reasonably defensible legal basis to do so. So there you'd be working together. Another area is to bring a challenge against a federal law or policy in Wisconsin. The AG needs to have approval from either the governor or from one of the houses of the legislature. They need to authorize that action. So there you'd potentially be working together again. And then the other role that I think is an important one in the AG's office is an advocacy role. So advocating for policies that are going to make our communities safer and stronger. And there, of course, you're advocating to members of the legislature and hoping that the governor signs legislation. So it depends on the context, but in some contexts, you're clearly working together, and in others, the AG's office acts largely independently. I also think, there are times, even in those contexts, when the AG certainly might be advocating for a different policy than the governor, or the governor, for example, may take a position that is not legally defensible. So in Wisconsin earlier this year, Governor Walker was refusing to call special elections for a state Senate district and a state assembly district. And there I looked at the statute, and it's clear, I think it was very clear that he had to call those elections and should have. And there I think the AG should have spoken up and said, Governor Walker, you need to call these elections. This is not a legally defensible position.
And presumably then that's true, no matter whether you're the same party or a different party, that, that piece of it, that making sure that the things that the governor is doing are legally defensible would be something you would continue to do.
That's exactly right. And that the approach should be the same regardless of which party the governor is a member of. I think the AG needs to be independent and a watchdog for Wisconsinites.
So you are the father of two young sons, and this is the kind of question that people often ask mothers, but not so often fathers. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of how having kids shapes your worldview, your political view, and how it affects running for office.
So I have two boys. Simon is 4.5. Henry is 21 months. being a parent shapes your view on a lot of things, I think. I touched before on school safety. The daycare that my kids go to had a lockdown drill earlier this year. We didn't have those when I was a student in schools in Wisconsin. We had fire drills and we had tornado drills, but we didn't have lockdown drills. And working to make our schools safe is important regardless, but that certainly reinforces the importance as a parent. And so, when I hear my opponent suggest that we consider arming teachers in Wisconsin, it's the idea that teachers at daycare that my kids go to or the schools that they'll go to as they get older, to me, that is an alarming idea. It introduces a danger that isn't there. And, it is one more motivation for fighting against any effort to arm teachers in Wisconsin. It's also a motivation, again, an additional motivation for making sure that our schools are as safe as they can be. And I think to do that, we need to enact common sense gun safety measures like universal background checks and a ban on bump stocks. But also just in thinking about the future of this state, the state that they're going to grow up in, again, that as a parent, that has to affect your viewpoint. And so, protecting our natural resources to make sure that we have clean air and clean water, which I think is vital to our health, our economy, and our quality of life. Again, those are values that I have that I had anyway, but certainly, as a parent, that reinforces some of those things.
So Wisconsin is a state that's kind of purple-ish at different elections, tends to go different ways. It was one of the states, of course, we watched very closely in the 2016 election. What is your sense going around Wisconsin this year, talking to people about their interest level in politics in general, how much attention they're paying to the elections, especially, down ballot things like Attorney General that don't often get as much attention?
I think there's a lot of enthusiasm among Democrats. I think there are a lot of people in Wisconsin who want to see a change of direction. And so I'm upbeat about the political environment that's out there right now. With respect to our Attorney General, I think he has been, very partisan, and I think he has put the interests of special interests ahead of the interests of Wisconsinites far too often. And I think that's something that a lot of people have noticed. One of the lawsuits that he got the state of Wisconsin involved in was a challenge to federal policy that guaranteed overtime pay for people who put in the hours and make between about $23,000 and $47,000 a year. So he fought against overtime pay for middle class families in Wisconsin. I think that is not in the interests of Wisconsinites. As I mentioned before, he suggested we consider arming teachers, which even Scott Walker has opposed. When there was, there's another issue that's come up is the distribution of blueprints that can be used to make guns on 3D printers. These are untraceable plastic guns. A number of AGs spoke out and tried to halt the distribution of those blueprints. But our AG said he was studying the issue. And that was a few months ago at this point, and we still haven't heard any results from that study. So, there are important issues, and I think that I think there's real energy among people for getting out and voting this year.
Are there other things that you would like to make sure that we talk about today?
So I think that we talked about this a little bit, but one of the big differences in the race is that I believe that we need an AG who's going to effectively and even-handedly enforce the laws that protect our environment and the laws that protect consumers in Wisconsin. We have had a significant decline in fines collected from polluters under our current AG, even compared to his Republican predecessor. And it'd be great if that was because pollution had dropped dramatically in Wisconsin, but unfortunately that's not the case. And in Kewaunee County right now, far too many families have to worry that when they turn on the tap, brown water is going to come out. I think that in Wisconsin in 2018, no family should have to worry about the safety of the water that their kids are drinking. And that when polluters break the law and make a mess, they should expect to be held accountable.
If our listeners would like to help you out in this final couple weeks of the campaign, how can they do that?
Our website is joshkaul, joshkaul.org, and you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at joshkaulwi.
All right. Excellent. Thanks so much. And thank you for speaking with me today. I'm really excited about the kinds of things that strong AGs can do. And I'm glad to see so many strong Democrats running across the country. So thank you so much for running this year. And thank you for speaking with me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.